G'day there, everyone. Welcome back into the studio, and joining me today is Microsoft MVP Joy Apple. So, welcome into the studio, Joy. Nice to have you.
Thank you. It's an absolute pleasure to be here.
Now, today we're going to be talking a few different types of topics, but a couple of things that we're going to cover are intranets and also Microsoft Teams and how or should they or can they integrate with each other, but also talk about the topic of governance and what that means to you and what you're seeing and how important that is across an organization, both with intranets and the communication side, but also from a more collaborative side and a Microsoft Teams side. But before we jump into those topics, tell everybody that's watching and listening a little bit about Joy Apple.
Oh, goodness. Well, I think I like SharePoint a little bit too much. That's the number one thing that I'll confess right off the bat. Been in the space for a little over 15 years now. I absolutely feel that this is the most exciting time to be in the Microsoft, especially now the Microsoft 365 space. It's really exciting. I love the emphasis that we're seeing more and more on employee engagement, wellness, all that with the Viva Suite. But yeah, it's funny. Someone asked me today, what were the steps I took to become an MVP? And I was like, well, there's really no secret sauce. I said, for me, I talk a lot. I said, talking is my superpower. And I started talking a lot about how to help make things better in M365 and SharePoint, now Teams, OneDrive, the collaboration space. And one day I took a left turn and I started getting excited talking about governance and adoption. So here we are.
Yeah, and I was in a previous episode talking with Sari Sonia. I was talking about sharing information and sometimes what we take for granted, just the little things that we take for granted. A lot of people are still, still consume that and still think that that is groundbreaking stuff. So the more that we can obviously educate our customers and also anybody that's using Microsoft 365, I think it's it's always a good thing. It's going to drive adoption and also that engagement side of things as well. Now, first of all, also is a huge congratulations to you being renewed as the time that we record this, being renewed as a Microsoft MVP again. So congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Refresh day is always, or F5 day, as some of us call it. It's always an exciting day. Yeah, I think a lot of us celebrating and congratulations, and also shout out to everyone in the community, regardless of those three little letters after their name. Everyone that contributes to this community just goes above and beyond, and so appreciated.
They do. There's so much content and so much sharing of information that goes on in this community, regardless of whether you are an MVP or not. Now, let's dive into the topic, or one of the topics of today, around intranets and also Microsoft Teams. So obviously we've got this concept of an intranet. It is the place for the entire company to go to get stuff done, to find resources and information and things like that. It's an everyone type of place. And then we've got this collaborative type of situation where we're working with departments or functional areas or project teams or things like that. It tends to happen inside of Microsoft Teams. Now, there's a lot of, especially I see, there's a lot of confusion or different approaches to how these two can come together, and is there a complete distinction in that? What is your take on Microsoft Teams and this collaborative type of infrastructure versus a more open everyone type of thing in an intranet? Can they live together?
100%. And I would even say they should live together with the appropriate permissions in place. I feel that I was an early adopter of looking at Teams as part of the intranet, because traditionally, when we laid out the architecture of our intranets, we would come at permissions from a funnel perspective. the higher up in the food chain of the internet you are, like the corporate homepage or the landing pages that were really site collections, we would see permissions get broken the further down you would go to allow for that department only place. Now we look at Teams. We are hopefully flattening out our information architecture across the board, right? The M365 world is flat. SharePoint intranets are still a vastly critical component to the employee experience at an organization. But we've got those communication sites that are set up to be more of those. I call them company public. If you're an employee, you have read access likely to most every communication site, company public, landing page, whatever you want to call that, of the intranet. But then it's like you have a coin and you flip it. You've got that company public piece where I can go get the benefits information. I can go read the CEO's blog, all those things. On the flip side of that coin is that department, group, project, private collaboration space where security really comes into play at a much more granular level. It says, okay, yeah, you're an employee, but you're an employee in the HR department and you work in benefits and you're creating the content, you're managing the information, you're fielding the requests that nobody else should see. So we're going to secure that. We're going to put it over here in Teams. Content still lives in SharePoint. It's just on a more secured SharePoint Teams site away from the prying eyes of the rest of the organization. But it still absolutely should be considered as part of your information architecture and should be taken into account if you want to have that full holistic view of where we have content, what's out there, what needs to be managed, secured. We'll talk about this later. Governed, all that good stuff.
Yeah, and I think where I tend to have a lot of conversations about, when we've got a global navigation, for example, on an intranet, how those, how those private areas or secured locations, does that fit into like your global navigation of an intranet, or how do you tackle that type of scenario? Do you find that people, let's say I'm from the HR department, do I do I navigate to my SharePoint team site from the intranet, or is it like a completely separate type of way of working? I go to Microsoft Teams to do my work with my team.
So I'm not technically a consultant anymore, but I still have to give my consultant answer. It depends.
It depends. Good.
Depends. But I'm going to say typically I would push against putting things that most folks don't have access to in a global navigation, because it's not global, is it?
Yeah.
Right? It's not. Are there exceptions? Are there certain situations where, but this group is very, very special and they need to see it? Okay, so put it up there and put some audience targeting on it so you don't have everybody else clicking on it and being told they don't have access, right? 'Cause that's not a good
Exactly. I was just about to say that. I mean, if you're going to do that in a global navigation sense, you don't want all of these workspaces or private sites visible in a global navigation, and then people just go there, request access denied, all that sort of stuff. It doesn't give you a great user experience. But if you do need to put it in there, no, that's right. So combining audience targeting with that security does work and does help that experience. But just makes that a little bit more complicated as well, I guess.
Sure. And I would say too, let's keep going. So we're in HR, right? And we see the new homepage is launched or the global nav is there or whatever. Oh, I can get to my private HR benefits only team site from the global nav. Let's say we do that.
Mm-hmm.
Don't do it. But let's say we're doing that. Okay, I click it. I go to the team site that only I and my team have access to, and my documents are there. Awesome. That's great for me so far. But I can't chat there. So I'm still going to be opening up Teams to be there where I can get to my chat, all the conversations, and my files. And if we've built it right, the tabs that take me to all the other things. So I might use that global nav link once maybe a couple of times, but more than likely, I'm not going to enjoy playing hopscotch of linking. Oh, I need to go to Teams anyway. I'm probably going to
Yeah.
start going to Teams. As users, and even IT, we are users of technology. We find our own path, and we're going to find the path of least resistance. Likely for that dedicated department level work, it's not going to be through the homepage of the intranet. It's going to be through another resource.
Yeah. And do you see this? I mean, this topic's and conversation or debate or whatever you want to call it's come up a lot in recent years about, is an intranet still relevant? We've got Microsoft Teams, and people have tried to use Microsoft Teams for everything, right? So we've got an all-company team. We're going to use that for the intranet. Why do we need an intranet? What's your view on that topic?
Danger, Will Robinson.
I know.
Because if we want to cram everything that's company wide into one team, that means I see one of two likely scenarios. I'm going to be getting a ton of notifications that are going to be very distracting, potentially annoying. Okay, great. There's a news announcement about another facility that opened up, and that's very exciting for the company, but I don't need that to distract me from doing my work over here. Okay, so let's turn off notifications. If I turn them off, am I ever really going to go consume that information? It's, one of those new phrases we use a lot, in the flow of work. Will it really be in the flow of my work to go out of my way and see those things? But if we have an intranet site, let's say a home site, where I have relevant news and I get those alerts when they're published through email, not in my face, but it's just an email, then that kind of comes more into as I have the time, as I'm going through my email, I'm making sure I'm up to date with things, then that comes to me and I can consume it. And I've got the site, I've got resources, I got things I can go use that aren't bombarding me with too many notifications. We still have to I feel we have to do more work than a lot of organizations think about up front to keep that home page, that home site engaging and fresh. But the Viva Suite helps make that much easier than it used to be. Being able to roll up news from other sites in the organization makes that easier. There are ways we can limit that burden. But I think it's important to think about what Microsoft would call the modern collaboration architecture. Have things in places where it makes sense that we go to, I want to say the phrase again, in the flow of work, but that aren't distracting us from doing what we need to do and focusing.
Yeah, I think. Well, you're sounding like a Microsoft employee in the flow of work, and using the right terminology. And I'll continue in the flow of work. Well, you mentioned Viva Connections there before as well. So, a lot of times I talk a lot about meeting people where they are or where they choose to work. Right. So a lot of people choose to start their day in Microsoft Teams. A lot of people start their day in Outlook. A lot of people or organizations have a policy when somebody opens their browser up, the intranet comes and that type of thing. So being able to meet people where they choose to work, I think is, from a communications point of view and an intranet side of things, does help in that respect as well. You're not having to get bombarded with Teams pings or that type of thing as well. And I think Viva Connections is helping bring sort of all of that type of thing together. You're now seeing the feed, and you've got videos, and you've got Viva Engage now, just all coming into that sort of central point as well. Now, continuing on with Microsoft Teams, we've obviously got different channels now. So we've got our standard channels, we've got our private, and now our shared channels. What are you seeing? What are the implications around? What do people need to be aware of when we're talking about private and shared channels? What are the implications that you're seeing some organizations have with implementing those? And what do we need to think about? What do they need to think about before actually going out and saying, right, we're just going to have a private channel here, shared channel there?
Don't do it. Have a conversation first. Not saying don't ever do it, but resist the urge to make everything a private channel. I have a phrase that I used a lot when I was doing more training consulting. It still comes up from time to time when I'm working with customers. If you're in the team, you're on the team. Don't put people in a team that by default should be architected for team work. Right? Security best practice has always been, going back to SharePoint days, secure the largest object possible.
Yep.
The SharePoint world, right? That's a site. Do we have exceptions sometimes? Sure, but there's a reason they're exceptions. We're looking at Teams. Teams is governed by that M365 group. So the whole point is we use that as a security service. So everyone we put in there is on the team. They're there to do things. They're there to be part of the conversation, have access to the content, edit, maybe delete, right? All the things are there. That can be a little scary and intimidating. But for example, I had a client when I was still consulting call up. They built a team for their department, and every functional business area of the department, they gave them a private channel. They couldn't use the OneNote notebook. They couldn't use the planner plan because they had pulled and stretched the permissions of that group to pieces. You've said this area is secure. It's special. It's different. So why should they all be able to use those same core resources? You said they can't, but now you want them to. And now you're trying to get them to work just inside one tiny folder in a library, right? So that from a couple of different reasons, that could be very confining. So think about what's the goal? What's the scope? What's the purpose of this team? Is it truly a team? Private channels, shared channels are amazing tools. Every time we create one, we do expand our information architecture by one site, a SharePoint site collection to be very specific. That's okay if it's for a very good reason. If it's because, I'll go back to my consulting days, it's a project, but I need one channel where the PM and the billing department can work together to make sure the bills are paid, the invoices come in and all that. Consultants don't need access to that information. They don't need to know, and they likely don't want to know. It's a cubbyhole for sensitive information that's still related to that team as a whole. Awesome. It's serving a purpose. This is a security need, not a security want. Rock and roll.
Yeah.
But if we're doing it just for organization, then we need to really map out what that is and give the people places where they can actually work, use the resources, tools, and have room to grow.
Yeah, I think that's where people get into trouble. Is well, not trouble, but get things in an that's right. And I have seen teams set up in the manner that you've just described there, where it's the general channel, but there might be 5 or 6 private channels inside of that team, and it kind of defeats the purpose of having a team, right? I was talking to a client the other day in a similar way, but this is in the context of Microsoft Loop. Microsoft Loop is obviously for this open, collaborative, free-flowing thinking, planning, creating all together in a workspace, where they wanted to try and, I guess, manage the permissions at different pages and components and all that sort of stuff. And it kind of is way too complex. I mean, it kind of does defeat the purpose of the tool itself. And similar thing with Microsoft Teams, right? I mean, a team is a team. You're there to get work done together, not to segment out, different parts of the team. So I think that's some good advice there too. And yes, they can be amazing. Shared channels can be an amazing capability and an amazing enabler. But there needs to be a purpose around that.
We use the heck out of shared channels at Orchestrate, just internally. My success team, I have a shared channel that's shared with the devs. So if a customer is having an issue or a question and I need dev help, they're there. It's not an extra additional team that they have to keep up with. It's just this one cubbyhole. In this case, instead of being smaller, it's got bigger membership, and they're there. They don't care about the rest of the stuff I'm talking about and the rest of the team. right? They're there for
Yeah.
what they need. Beautiful. Absolutely
Mm.
beautiful.
Because a lot of people think, actually, with shared channels, a lot of people think that the use case there is for external. So I can have a shared channel with you. So in my tenant, I can share a channel with you, and it appears in your in your home tenant, and you've got access to it. You don't have to switch tenants, all that sort of stuff,
Mm-hmm.
like we used to be able to do. So that's the external side of things. But you've just touched on a really good use case for internal type of use for shared channels. And I think a lot of people don't sort of realize the advantages or the potential of using shared channels internally as well. Do you use a lot of, internally at Orchestra, you're using a lot of those type of, shared
Oh,
channels in
yes.
those scenarios? Yeah.
Yeah, we sure are. We don't have any turned on for external sharing just
Yeah.
because there's a lot of trust that has to be in place between two
Yeah. Yeah.
organizations to do that, right? But internally, I could probably name 5 shared channels right now that I'm a part of,
Yeah.
just to keep the team sprawl low, right? Share a channel to the people that need to be part of just this topic of a team. Like again, our director of sales is also in support because things like that can impact what she's doing in her pipeline, and she needs to be made aware of things. She doesn't really need to be in all the other channels that we're talking about, the ins and outs of our success strategies and things like that. So it helps reduce the notification fatigue that we can see in teams when everything's just wide open and you're in 50 different teams. It's just opening up the channels literally where people need to be. We love them.
Helps. It really helps internal communication, I find, as well. So from a
Oh,
from a
yeah.
comms perspective, it does. Yeah, it does enhance that as opposed to the other way. Yeah, interesting. Interesting. Now let's turn our attention a little bit now to governance. So governance means different things to different people. Um, Give me your take or your explanation or your view on governance across. Let's just tackle SharePoint and Microsoft Teams because it could be
Sure.
it could be it could be ever it could be a really broad topic.
Oh, it absolutely could be. I tend to approach governance in a very simple way, which can be shocking and almost sounds counterintuitive because I remember the days of talking customers off the ledge of publishing a 500-page governance document. Nobody's going to read it, right? Nobody. And at that point, it's useless. If you can't enforce it and you can't communicate it, it's not doing much for you. I view governance as putting a fence around your backyard, right? It keeps your family, it keeps the pets, it keeps people safe. It's a security boundary in some ways, guardrails. Should every team in the organization have the capacity for guests? That could be an it depends answer, but likely no. Right? So governance says only specific teams should be allowed to have guests. How do we enforce that? What do we do? Do we script that? Is there a form people fill out to get approval to have that? How do we document that? Should every document ever created in the organization live forever? The legal department has nightmares about every file living forever, right? So likely no. How do we manage that then? So from my perspective, roles and responsibilities are very important. Who should be able to do certain things? Who are the decision makers? What are security boundaries that are going to be in place? Retention, lifecycle management, things like that. That's usually where I start those governance conversations.
And I guess you've got to weigh up how far you go with that as well with the usability, I guess. I mean, the more strict and governed things are, or the harder things are to use, then end users might end up just doing something else that's a hell of a lot easier to get their
Yep.
little task done, as
Yep.
opposed to, oh, I've got to go and read this entire government. This is a piece of content. How do I go about creating that? Or I just need to create a space to collaborate with a group of people because I'm planning an event.
Yeah.
How do we go and do that easily? Do I have to go and create a team and then change all these settings and do all that sort of stuff? I guess the more that you can automate a lot of that, the better, right?
I would say so. And there's lots of different ways to do it, but if you can take, and that's work too, just getting the decisions documented.
Yeah.
Uh, but as much of that as you can automate, whether it's through having them fill out a form, giving IT the information, and then do we script it? Do we have a group of folks in IT that goes and builds that and they kind of run that interference? Or do we go third party tool? There's options. But if you can make your governance something that's living, breathing, that just happens when the user puts in the request. No, the end users don't feel like they have to become a governance expert.
Yeah.
And they're not then having IT coming back to them going, why didn't you do it the right way?
Yeah.
Right? Nobody wants to do that. So you can definitely create a winning scenario where folks get what they need in a timely manner, but the right decisions have been made and applied to the content as it's delivered to the end user.
Yeah.
Also going to reduce your shadow IT by doing that too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Now, it's got to be flexible though, right? So you create, you've done a lot of planning around your governance, and I think that's really important to do. It does sound very complex, but it doesn't need to be. You can start from let's just say an MVP, minimal viable product of a governance framework. And then I guess that just continues to evolve. The Microsoft 365 platform is huge, right? So we're just talking about two little buckets of SharePoint and Teams, and that is quite significant. But then you've got lots of other areas, Power Apps and Power Automate, and all of that type of thing too. So I think it's probably really important that you form, the view of not trying to get everything done and documented, or else you're going to be 12 months down the track and you're still not there, right?
100%. Always start simple. There's a saying that a friend of mine used to use all the time. It's like, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time.
Yeah.
Governance is an elephant. It could be something as simple as naming conventions.
Yeah.
When we're going to name teams, do we want to have prefixes and or suffixes? So when you look at the group, the site, or the team, you know exactly who and what it's for. It's a great idea. So start small. Is it a department workspace or is it a project? If it's a project, okay, are we going to have external people in it? If so, should it start with PRJ and have an EXT there so we know there's external people? Keep it simple. Let folks get used to that for a little while. Then, as people get comfortable, you can make it a little fancier. You can add that sophistication or go, oh, well, we've also seen we've got this other type of workspace now that we need. Let's add that in. And folks will be much less resistant to it. Gradual, it makes sense. And they're not feeling like things are being taken away from them. You're just kind of adding to the process.
On that side of things, so I think it's not really forgotten, but something that's overlooked a little bit, I think, is around the lifecycle management of a team or a unit of work. So projects are a perfect example, events or those type of things that have an end date. We still,
Sure.
there needs to be some type of process, I guess, around, what do we do with that content? I come into organizations a lot where they've just got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of teams for projects. they're still all, or they seem active, so people can still change and add and remove and, do lots of things. How important is the lifecycle management around not just the containers of Teams, but also content and that as well?
Oh, it could be vastly important. Think about, well, I was teasing about the legal department earlier, but it's funny, when I was a consultant helping build intranets, they would ask if they should have a retention policy. I would say,
Mm.
you probably should have a few. Well, where do we start? It's like, have you asked your legal department? Do you have a compliance team? Oh, no. Right, because there are laws that dictate a lot of this that you could just go look
Yeah.
up, or there are guidelines and recommendations. But if you think about that content just sitting out there forever, how many times have we in our various jobs over the years needed to find a set of instructions, and you find them, awesome, you do the thing, and then someone says, why did you do it that way? We haven't done it that way in years.
Mm.
Well, but the handbook is here. I mean, I know it says 1998, but it's the only one I could find.
Yeah.
That right there is just a simple example of just frustration that could be reduced. Search would be better if we didn't have everything that met our query coming up in it. I did some training for a coal plant, an energy plant. And one of their big things was making sure the most recent version of their safety procedures was available. So from the practical perspective of the end users, there's lots of reasons. But when it all comes down to it, storage is not free.
Yeah.
So being able to recoup some of the costs in offloading that old, out-of-date, stale content is very beneficial.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Although we might be bound to keep content for 3 years, 7 years, whatever the time period is, when that time period comes, being able to dispose of that content is something that's really important. I think, as well as keeping the content, we need to be able to I'm sure you've done it before as well. When you're migrating people from a file share, let's say, into Microsoft 365, one of the most common things is, how much content do we migrate across? Do we take across the last 7 years, the last 10 years? Because they don't have that capability on a file share so much, and they've never really thought about it, they might have documents from 10, 15, 20, 25 years ago that then come into Microsoft 365. So the tools and the capabilities that people do have inside of SharePoint now, or the platform itself, I think, is extremely beneficial, and something, really fairly straightforward to get into play, so that they can, people can take advantage of that too.
Yeah. And there's a lot of options. So anyone listening to this and you're thinking, oh, I need to do that, we need to think about that, I should start having this conversation. SharePoint's not the only storage option. File shares aren't the only storage option. You could move that stuff that's not active anymore, but you need to keep, could go to like Azure Files, cold storage for much less than keeping it in your SharePoint environment.
Yeah, that's right. And Orchestra itself, actually, while we touch on how we actually go about doing that, Orchestra itself has an interesting way in which the archiving works. Tell me a little bit about how the archiving works with Orchestra.
Yeah, so almost everything Orchestra does is policy driven. So if we're looking at life cycle policies, it can be driven based on inactivity or a period of time. So you could look at a team and say, okay, this has been inactive for 180 days. What do we want to do with it? We could archive it in place, which means let's make it read only, maybe restrict the permissions, maybe pull it out of the search scope so it's not cluttering up search results, and just let it sit there for a little while. That could be a good, kind of like coming from the file share, right? You get it to where it needs to go, but then you want to break that muscle memory of people going back to the file share. Here, we want to break the muscle memory of people going back to that stuff that's not active anymore, putting it to bed. So give them time. If they need to go back and get something, we can help them. But then after a certain period of time, our two-step process is, now what do you want to do? Maybe it's been a month, maybe it's been 3 years. Do we just delete it because there's no regulation saying we need to keep it and we know we're done with it? Or should we move that to an official SharePoint archive site? Delete the team, delete the site, take the content, a file of the permissions. If it's a team, the chat, put that in Excel, and we can put it in a SharePoint spot for as long as you need to.
Yeah.
We're looking at capabilities to be able to go, oh, well, you want to move this to Azure files? Okay. Maybe a third-party storage solution? Okay. But let's make sure we're managing it so the right content is living and breathing, and then the right content is put to bed, maintained and respected, but not being accidentally referenced or overused.
Yeah, it's important to have that in place, I think, and you're right. SharePoint storage isn't the cheapest, so having options like that is really important to be able to do that. Now, moving on a little bit into the future now, obviously, you mentioned at the start that, this period of time in Microsoft 365 is pretty exciting. I mean, I don't think you've been in it for a long time. I've been in it for a long time. I don't think I've seen a period sort of over the last probably 2 to 3 months where there's been so much excitement and new technology coming out that is going to really change the way people go about doing their work and meet and that type of thing. What you've seen over the last few months, what's going to have the biggest impact, do you think? What's going to be front and center for you?
For me personally, I think this is going to sound odd, I think, but I think me watching the way people think about AI changing is going to be the most interesting thing to watch, because we've all been, not all, but I feel like there's a lot of hesitancy. It's like, okay, we think we like it, but we don't know yet. But I think like once Copilot rolls out more, yes, I said the magic word, right? We're going to see people go, oh, okay, right. This is, I like what Caruana said at EduCon in DC, right? It's named Copilot for a reason. It's not coming in to take over and fly the plane, coming to help and be an assistant. And I think that's going to be very exciting. Personally, for me, what I currently use like ChatGPT for is, okay, I need to write this thing, but how should the first sentence start? How would I write an intro to somebody I've never met saying, hi, how are you? I want to talk to you about this thing. So just being able to get those juices started, then I'll take that sentence and go, well, I wouldn't really say it that way. Oh, I'd say it this way. And then I make it mine. So seeing things like that are going to be very powerful, I think, just getting some of those little things going.
Yeah.
I think excited.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
That's going to, that chat to GPT stuff and Copilot, I think, is going to really ramp up how internal communication's done as well. I think a lot of organizations are going to see a lot more people coming to the party and creating content internally and becoming, content creators basically inside of their organization. I think is going to be exciting to see too.
And I think it's going to lower the barrier to entry for a lot of folks that maybe have felt intimidated to step up and try this tool, this product, or this app inside of M365. I think with Copilot there, it's going to be less intimidating to help them get started. I think we're going to see citizen developers just bloom across the planet, because that one little piece of intimidation will be lowered and people are going to be more willing to step in and try. And I think that's going to be very exciting to see. Yeah,
absolutely. Absolutely. The workflows are going to improve. Content creation is going to improve. SharePoint, there's some really good things coming in that space as well. So it is an exciting time. Now, as we wrap things up, Joy, it's been a great conversation. Tell me where can people find you? Where can they follow your content? You do create, publish a lot of content across the channel. So where's the best place people can interact with you?
The best place is probably going to be Twitter. I am at Joy of SharePoint on Twitter. And then after that would be LinkedIn, Joy
Yep.
Apple, LinkedIn. Those are my two main. I love Twitter, though. I know there's been
You're
controversy,
not
but
on Threads. You haven't jumped on the Threads bandwagon.
I've not. I doubt I will. I've got enough. Um, yeah, probably not going to go there. But I got onto Twitter in 2009 when I became a SharePoint farm admin because
SharePoint
Microsoft people were
farming.
there.
Yeah.
Yes. And I would watch people put tweets out when they would put patches or upgrades or whatever. And I would watch the pain and suffering. And I would not apply the patches until the bleeding stopped and people stopped complaining. It was like, okay, I'm going to go apply the patches.
Very good. Very good use. Yeah. Like it. Now you do a bit of speaking. You do a bit of speaking as well. You got any conferences? You getting any speaking engagements coming up where people can catch you?
At the end of July, I'm going to be at the M365 Community Days in New York. Very excited about that. And then I'm going to be speaking at 365 EduCon in Seattle. Got a couple of sessions out there. That will be fabulous. And that might be the last in-person thing until CollabCon and Sharon's going to kill me. I just forgot the date. I need to look it up. But CollabCon for All in Orlando is coming up. I'm Googling it right now. Too many dates.
We'll put all these dates and everything like that in the show notes as well, so people, if they're in the area, can come and catch your sessions as well.
Orlando's going to be fabulous. September 15th. We put it on a Friday so you could come and then go to all the Disney parks after.
Oh, right. Well done. Good strategy. Yeah, amazing. Well, Joy, it's been a great conversation. Thank you very much for jumping in. I know it's getting late there, so
my pleasure.
Thanks again. We'll have to do it again. Thank you very much.
100%. Thank you. Appreciate you so much and all you do for the community.